people that wouldn't turn the air conditioner on until the 4th of July and wouldn't turn the heat on until after Christmas. One of these guys that was just really, really stingy or frugal or whatever name we want to put on it. And this man made his wife make a promise to him that when he was dead, she would bury the $100,000 that he managed to save in his coffin along with him. Well, the day came, he died, and the widow was seen placing a small wooden box in the coffin right before they closed it up. The widow's friends were just flabbergasted. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. And one of them said, You didn't really just put $100,000 in that coffin, did you? And the woman said, Of course I did. I'm a Christian woman. I can't lie. I wrote him a check. That one wasn't quite as good, was it? Grace and peace to you from God the Father, and from our Lord and from our Savior, Jesus, who is the Christ. Amen. Today we start a new sermon series on the Apostle Paul. And you may be sitting here wondering, why do we need to spend an entire sermon series on Paul? What makes him so significant that we're going to spend 6 weeks here in church learning more about the great apostle, the greatest evangelist our faith has ever known? Well, this man is significant because of who he was, because of what he was able to do as he spread the faith throughout the Roman Empire. There has never been a greater apostle outside of Paul. Today I want to start by looking at his earlier life. What was it about this person that God looked down from heaven, saw inside of his life and experiences, saw inside of his heart, inside of his mind, and God said, yes, I can use that for my own purposes. Paul is so very important. I think he's probably the second most influential person in our faith, right behind Jesus Christ. We had done that sermon series on Moses about a year ago, and Moses is important for our faith, and particularly for the Old Testament. And it was important for Jesus, too, the foundation of our faith. But Paul is the man who looks at what Jesus has done. Who looks at his life, looks at the miracles, looks at the teachings and the parables that he done, looked at the death and the resurrection, and puts meaning to it. Helps to put some theology behind it, some philosophy behind it, you might say. The New Testament has 27 books in it. Anybody want to venture how many of these books were written by the Apostle Paul? 19 is a good guess, very close. It's actually 13. 13 out of the 27 books that we have in the New Testament are written by Paul. Some of them are longer, some of them are very, very short. But every one of these 13 books that he wrote are letters to these different churches that he had started, that he had founded. And many of them are words of encouragement. Some of them are words of rebuke, trying to get them to follow the way again. But much of what we read in the New Testament on Sunday mornings are typically that second lesson. Sometimes they're called epistles. These are letters from Paul. If you read the book of the Acts of the Apostles, half of the Acts of the Apostles, which is the early church, is devoted to this man, Paul, Saul of Tarsus. Now, our readings for this morning drop us into really the first in-depth moment that we know of this man named Saul. And it's not a good picture. The first scene that we have of Saul is of a persecutor, is a man filled with hatred for what they call the followers of the way. Did you know that Christians were not always called Christians? When we first started, we were just known as followers of the way. Following Jesus, following the Messiah. And this Saul wanted to squash this movement. And it is Saul who is standing by approving the death of the very first martyr, Stephen. And we read about this anger, this just ferociousness inside of Saul as he attacks born between 5 BC and 5 AD. We're not exactly sure on that. About the same year that Jesus was. And he'll die in the year 65 AD. He's actually beheaded for the faith. When he's about 30 years old, though, is when we have this account where he is standing by Stephen. Before that, we have little snapshots. And I pulled some of those from these 13 letters just to give us a starting place. So here's what Paul says about himself. He says, I am Paul, and I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of an important city, circumcised on the 8th day, a member of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew, born of Hebrews, brought up in Jerusalem at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God. I advanced in Judaism beyond many among my people of the same age. Now, that's about all that we have, but just those few sentences from Paul give us a lot of information on who this man was. So he tells us he was born in the town of Tarsus. And you'll see up here on the map, Tarsus is now located in what is modern-day Turkey. And Paul would have been a part of what they call the diaspora, Jews that left Jerusalem starting around the year 587, and many Jews would have left Israel, would have left Jerusalem, and many of them would have never returned home. And so we hear that Paul, he and his family, lived in a town called Tarsus. And this is important, because Tarsus, back when Paul lived, was a very, very important city for a number of different reasons. You can see it's a mountainous region. It looks, in a lot of ways, almost like the Rocky Mountains. And Tarsus is located about 8 miles north of the Mediterranean Sea. But he would have looked out windows and he would have seen these beautiful mountain ranges looking very much like this. But what made Tarsus so important was it was located along a trade route. And in ancient times, if you were a city located on a trade route, that was significant. Almost in the same way that if you are a town located along an interstate today, you have commerce coming in and out, travelers coming in and out, stopping in your city. Well, Tarsus was located along this route, and it was called the Cilician Gates. I'm sorry, that's hard to read. The Cilician Gates was this narrow pathway that they intentionally helped carve out through these mountains. And people would be able to travel hundreds of miles, taking their goods from one place to another. And Tarsus was located there. Tarsus was a town of about 300,000 people when Paul lived, which is significant. It was a huge city. And because of that, it was a place filled with learning. It was a place filled with libraries and theater and athletic games and great scholarly debates. And this was a city that was well renowned. And so Paul would have spent his first years surrounded by all this deep thinking, this philosophy, and this stoicism. And we read a lot of this in his letters. He knows how to debate. He knows how to think. And I'm convinced when God was looking down, trying to figure out who can I use to spread my church, he saw that in Paul, and he wanted to use it. We also know that Paul was a Roman citizen. And on the face of it, it might not sound that important, but for Paul, it was deeply important. Because being a Roman citizen meant that he was allowed to travel anywhere he wanted in the Roman Empire. And he would need this citizenship in order to start all the different churches that he will along the way. Now we also know that around the age of between 13 to 16, his family sends him back to Jerusalem. And we read that he studies under this great rabbi called Gamaliel, is how you pronounce that, Gamaliel. And he is still very well known as a very devout rabbi. And Paul would have spent about the years from 13 to 20 learning the Hebrew faith, learning the Jewish faith, learning the Old Testament. And I think that's another time where God looked down at this man named Saul. And Saul knew the faith very, very deeply. Now, this is just a starting point. Today, we start our journey about Paul. And I want us to remember this as we read about all the different places that he will go to from here. Next week, we'll start going on these travels, these different missionary voyages that he undertakes. And I'm convinced that God looked at Saul, and even with the hatred that we read about today as he stones this Stephen, and he has just an anger inside of him. And yet God uses it. God sees this man with the gifts that he has been raised with, the abilities, the talents, and he comes into his life. He has this moment on the road to Damascus where Jesus says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now for us, how can we find meaning in this? I'm convinced that God looks at each and every one of us and ponders, how can I use you today? What in your past has made you your own apostle for Christ? Where are you in this moment of your life that God can look down and say, yes, I want to use her today to do something good. Or I want to use him and his past and what he's become to advance my kingdom, to do something good in this world. And so as we leave today, I want you to ponder that. What is it about my history, my heritage, my upbringing, the good and the bad, that God can use? Because God is using us. God is equipping us to do his will. Amen?